Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life. Let's start by reading out principles number 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Principle 6, I believe with perfect faith that all the words of the prophets are true.
Thank you. Anyone wants to do principle number 7?
I will. I believe with perfect faith that the prophecy of Moses, our teacher, was absolutely true. He was the father of all prophets, those who came before him and those who came after him.
Thank you. And who wants to do principle number 8? Thank you, James.
I believe with perfect faith that the Torah which we have today in our hands is the actual Torah given to Moses, our teacher.
Okay, principle number 9. Anyone?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Trudy.
I believe with perfect faith that the Torah will not be changed and there will never be any other Torah given by the Creator.
Okay, so the first set of principles was establishing that there is a creator. The next principle, the one about prayer, establishes that we can communicate to that creator. So what do you think these next 4 principles establish? It starts with establishing that there's a creator, understanding a little bit more about it, establishing that we can communicate with that creator, and then we can talk to that creator. What is this establishing?
The creator can communicate with us.
Beautiful. That the creator communicates with us, right? That's what it is. I believe with perfect faith that all the words of the prophet are true. That is, what is prophecy?
It's a direct communication from God to this prophet, and he instructs this prophet to communicate his word to us.
Beautiful. So actually what prophecy is God's communicating to the prophet, and the prophet being given permission to transmit what God communicates to the rest of the Jewish people, or whoever he's told to give that prophecy to. The written Torah is comprised of 3 parts. It's comprised of the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash, and then it's comprised of what's called prophets, which is some of the prophecies that were written down. And now there were thousands and thousands of prophets that were over time. Why were there only some of them written down?
Are they deemed relevant for posterity as opposed to specific for that time?
That's a great answer, because not every prophecy that was given was something that we could learn from nowadays. Every single prophecy that has been recorded and written down is something that is relevant for all times, and that's why it was recorded. Okay, now, do we have prophecy today?
No.
No. Does God communicate with us today?
Not directly, you mean? Directly, like the sense of Moses?
I would say yes.
Prophecy, which was direct communication from God, ended around the time of the Second Temple, right? So we don't have prophecy anymore, and anyone that says to you that they are a prophet or they've had direct communication from God, you don't have to believe them. Let's put it like that, right? You don't have to believe them. But there are lower levels of transmission. For example, there's something called Ruach HaKodesh, which means like divine inspiration. And one of the ways, in fact, we're told that when a parent names a child, the Jewish name, the Hebrew name, they're given divine inspiration as to what that child's name is, and why that is because in Jewish thought, the name of a person is the essence of that person, right? So when you're giving a name to a child, it's a pretty big decision that you're sort of naming the essence of the child. And when a parent does that, they're given what's called Ruach HaKodesh, this divine inspiration. And there are people that are more connected to spirituality and to God, and they'll have divine inspiration more. There's also something called Da'at Torah, which is the knowledge of Torah, which is a Torah scholar. And this is what's behind the premise of going to a Torah scholar and asking for advice, right? Because someone who is more connected to spirituality, to God, they have an extra level of this transmission, of this communication from God. I'll give you an example of what that Ruach HaKodesh, that divine inspiration, can look like. when our third child was born. So she was born, I don't know, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and like around, and we didn't find out whether she was going to be a boy or girl beforehand. So we kind of had discussed boys' names. For whatever reason, we thought we were having a boy, and she's a girl. And we kind of had like very momentarily discussed, if it's a girl, maybe we'll name her Sarah, after my husband's grandmother was Sarah. And so she was born in the middle of the night, and my husband was about to leave, and just before he left, he's like, should we discuss the name? And I was like completely exhausted. I'm like, oh, no. Anyway, so he went home, he came back later that day, and I had an idea for the baby's name. And I was like, oh, so did I have an idea for the baby's name? I said to him, what was your name? And he said that my idea was, let's call her Sarah, but let's add on the name Miriam. And I said, wow, because that was the name that I had also thought of, right? Like we both had kind of independently, even like I don't know why I came up with that name, and he, like we both independently came up with that name, because even when you're naming after a relative or something, oftentimes there's a choice, and why are we led in a certain direction? So most prophets had something similar to like an epileptic fit when they were having a prophecy, because it was such an intense experience, right? Like that's why when we have a dream, or when we have divine inspiration, or when we go to a rabbi and a rabbi tells us what to do, which is Da'at Torah, right? Like this knowledge of Torah that they impart to us, it's so much of a lower level of transmission of communication from God. So that's just the point that I want to make clear, that we don't have prophecy these days. That prophecy is God communicating, but it was very, very, very clear that this was a communication from God, and it was an intense experience that they had. Principle. I just want to make that clear, right? When we say I believe with perfect faith, we're believing in prophecy. What we're talking about nowadays, the levels of communication that God has with us, is not considered prophecy, right? It's divine inspiration, it's knowledge of Torah, right? And how do we know that there is these levels of communication from God? Is because the Torah was given in 2 parts. Has anyone ever tried reading the Torah? Tried reading the Chumash? What was your experience like? Just reading the Chumash?
It's hard,
It's hard. What else? What makes it hard?
because it's not literal.
It's not that it's not literal, because it is the literal
Yeah.
understanding of the Torah is still true, but it very often brings up more questions than it answers, right? When you do it. And what is it? It's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. So if God gave us the tip of the iceberg as communication, then it makes sense that God gave us alongside with it the mass of the iceberg underneath the water, which is the oral Torah, which was given at the same time as the written Torah. I wanted to say something here, is that you'll have people that will tell you, I believe in the written Torah, but I don't believe in the oral Torah. And believing in oral Torah, which means even believing in the transmission that we have nowadays, is hard. Why? Because at the end of the day, we all struggle to accept authority over ourselves. Right, that is part of the human struggle. We all want to be the final person to decide. Don't tell me what to do, right? Don't tell me what to do. Phenomena, and as long as we can, as long as we can say, like, I believe in the written Torah, but I get to decide what it means and how it applies to my life, then I remain the final arbiter of right and wrong in my life, right? Because I get to decide if this is that. But when we have to accept the oral Torah as well, what we're doing is we're accepting God's as the final arbiter of right and wrong in our life, which is a hard step to do. Now, sometimes the question that comes up is how do we reconcile the differences in opinions, right? Because has anyone ever come across this in Jewish law, right? Where you'll ask a question and there'll be, well, some opinions hold like this and some opinions hold like that, right? So if there's one truth, how can we have different types of opinions? So turn over. Does anyone want to read source number 1?
Even in respect to the difference of opinion regarding certain particulars, the authenticity of the claim is not undermined. Compare it to a single human body, which is made up of many different organs and systems. Some parts even oppose each other. Certain glands produce sugar while others produce insulin, which counteracts the effects of sugar. Health is a function of the proper balance between the disparate parts, not the absence of such parts. The heart differs vastly in form and function from the lungs, but both are essential to the health of a single body. So too the body of Torah. It consists of systems which in unison keep the world running. Torah sages are those internal organs through which God, the brain, the soul of it all, gives the world what it needs. If they disagree, it is not a disproof that God speaks through them. God causes one sage to emphasize one approach and another to emphasize another approach. Both are integral parts in the overall operation of the world.
But what
Thank
about when those opinions? I see that when the opinions kind of overlap, or that they're just marginally different, or they appeal to different parts of the mitzvah or whatever. But when those opinions directly
contradict.
each other.
And I think
But that's the
that
Talmud.
that is, I mean, well, the Talmud is contradiction, and then how it comes together, right? And I think that's the beauty of what he's trying to say here is, I'll give you an example, right? So Hasidic thought emphasizes emotion and joy and, you know, bringing your heart to the Jewish experience. To the experience of being Jewish, right? Whereas, for example, there's Litvaks, right, which is the Lithuanian school of thought. They emphasize very much Musar and character development and intellectual, like the intellectual learning of the Torah. Now, they're very different. The practice of a chassid and a litvak can be very different, and they may completely disagree with each other, right? The chassid will say, go daven late, right? Because it's better to spend hours preparing yourself and daven late in the morning. Whereas the litvak will say, no, that's completely wrong. You should daven early. And yet, as Jewish people, there's a place for both of them. There's a place for emotions, and there's a place for intellectualization. And it's fascinating how it only arose at a certain time in history, because before that it wasn't so important, but now it's important, right? So that's in a time of history, and I think the depth of what he's trying to say here is that the differences are emphasizing different parts, and for the whole of Judaism, we need both parts. And the other fascinating thing to bear in mind is that when we look at the differences, they're always in the details, right? You don't have a debate in the Talmud about whether Shabbat should be celebrated on the 6th or the 4th day, right? No,
Whether to daven or not.
or whether to daven or not, or even where to put the tefillin on, etc. Right? It's like the debate is always in the details, right? On Shabbat, when you're making your tea, which everyone agrees when Shabbat is, and everyone agrees that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, and everyone agrees that you're not allowed to boil water on Shabbat. But the question is, when you're making your tea, are you allowed to make it in a second cup or a third cup, or a third cup or not at all? The arguments are always in the details, and the point that he's kind of bringing out here is that the disagreements emphasize different parts, and even though they look contradictory to us, they're bringing out a different part in Judaism for us.
And they're both necessary.
And okay, question for you: how do we identify a Torah sage, Torah scholar, a rabbi, someone to look up to? If he's saying one of the things that we can kind of learn from this principle, even though we don't have prophecy nowadays, is the idea that we can look up to people that have this more divine inspiration. How do we know who is someone that we can look up to? What would you say the criteria would be?
Well, they're recognized by other rabbis.
For moral character.
Yeah.
To me, some of it is humility, because if somebody thinks they know it all, like absolutely, then they're probably not.
If we're looking for someone who we feel communicates God's word to us, then it has to be someone a little bit more qualified. And he throws out two criteria. This is from Rabbi Talbert. He says there's two things you want to look for. And one is that the person is age, has a considerable amount of life experience behind them. And the second thing is accomplishment. And when he says accomplishment, he says specifically that they're known to have inspired students who are themselves God-fearing people, right? Who are themselves spiritual, connected people, right? So we're looking for someone who has kind of like a track record, a proven track record of inspiring students who themselves become spiritual people. Thoughts? Yes, Noah.
Well, there are exceptions, like Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was very young. So there are some that they recognize right away that this person was so, like, they have this divine inspiration that, like, and for some reason they know right away that this person is like at such a high level, even though they are not very old.
Okay, what's special about the prophecy of Moses that it deserves an entire principle all on its own? We already said that we believe in the prophets, right? Was that the words of the prophet are true? Why do we have to have another principle of faith that the prophecy of Moses, our teacher, was absolutely true? He was the father of all prophets. Yeah.
Well, we believe that God spoke to him face to face, which he did with no one else. And because the Torah was literally given to us by Moses, who transcribed it, we have to believe in Moses because the Torah is the basis of our entire faith and religion.
Beautiful. So you're pointing out, I think you're pointing out firstly a difference, right? When Moses had a prophecy, Moses had all his faculties intact, right? He was able to communicate to God, with God, as though he was communicating with another human being, right? That's how close his prophecy was. Every other prophet, as we kind of said earlier, they almost had almost like an epileptic fit when they were having a prophecy, right? That's how intense the experience was. And it's kind of like you have the sunshine, right? That's shining through a building, but all the windows of the building are different colors. So one window's yellow and one window's painted blue and green, etc. So everyone's seeing the sunshine, but they're kind of seeing the sunshine in a different color because through a different filter, right? Because every other prophet was communicating the word of God, but it was influenced by their personality and their individuality. Whereas the prophecy of Moshe was kind of like unfiltered. It was like through a clear window.
But
yes.
You said that prophecy is so strong that it'll cause similar to an epileptic fit. How did Moses stand all the power coming to him? How did he stand it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and he was so spiritually developed that he was able to handle it. Because really, what prophecy is a level of spiritual development, right? Like a person who had gone through all the different levels of spiritual development could come to a place where they would be able to have God communicate with them. Okay, let's move on to principle number 8, right? So I believe it's perfect faith that the Torah that we have today is the actual Torah given to Moses, our teacher, right? And the truth is, it used to be harder to believe in the Torah. Okay, if we turn over to source number 2, does anyone want to start reading that?
By the early 90s, the evidence started mounting, and it was becoming obvious that the Torah was accurate, down to the most minute background details. Consequently, the next generation of biblical historians, like renowned Professor U.F. Albright, had to admit, until recently it was the fashion among biblical historians to treat the patriarchal sages of Genesis as though they were artificial creations of Israelite scribes of the divided monarchy, or possibly tales told by imaginative storytellers around Israelite campfires during the centuries following their occupation of the country. Names among scholars can be cited for regarding every item from Genesis as reflecting late inventions. However, archaeological discoveries since 1925 have changed all this. Aside from a few diehards among older scholars, there is scarcely a single biblical historian who has not been impressed by the rapid accumulation of data supporting this substantial historicity of patriarchal tradition. There is no serious Bible scholar remaining who can argue with the fact of these historical events. Another historian writes, each passing year adds to our store of knowledge and provides us with more and more documents, inscriptions, monuments, and excavations which confirm its historical accuracy. Science is now in a position to state categorically that the Bible is factual till proven otherwise. So much for the early Bible defenders.
And does anyone have any thoughts on that? Yes, Marla.
People have challenged me because, challenged the Bible to me because I believe in it, except the hardest thing that they still can't, that the big argument is like during the creation story itself and evolution. So I would say up to the point of when Abraham existed, yes, or even Noah, but before that, I don't think they're able to prove anything before that. As far as how it says 6 days and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So this isn't a class on the accuracy of the Torah, but one of the things that he's pointing out here is that we have a lot of archaeological evidence, and we have like the accuracy of, let's say, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls, where you have Torahs that are from countries that are far apart or dug up that are so similar to other Torah scroll, to the Torah scroll that we have, right? That how else would it be possible for it to be the same unless if it was divinely given and it was passed down over the years, right? Because if someone made it up, then why would Jews and Ethiopian Jews who had no connection to other Jews have the exact same Torah that we have? Or why would a scroll that they dig up have to be the exact same as the ones that we have? So, I mean, it's nice that we have all these evidence that line up to us, right? What we spoke about a couple of weeks ago is the idea of, the faith based on knowledge, right? We believe in it because, for example, the Passover story is so compelling, the evidence for it is so compelling, so we believe in it. So we have a belief that's based on knowledge, and because of that, there are things that we don't have evidence for that we believe. For example, like the Torah says that you should keep Shabbos, right? Which basically means when the Torah gives us the mitzvahs and the transgressions, it's telling us these are the things that you should do to protect the world, and these are the things that you mustn't do because doing them destroys the world a little bit, right? Now we don't see that. We can see how a murder destroys. We can see how stealing destroys, but we don't necessarily see how having the mezuzah builds the world, or keeping Shabbat builds the world, or but
Or not keeping Shabbat destroys
the world. We don't see that. We're called upon to believe it because we have a knowledge that's based on a faith that's based on knowledge. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Right? Like there are things that we can understand from this that we can verify this is true, and because of that we have a belief in the whole system. So there are things, for example, that we can believe in because of archaeological evidence, and now because we can believe in it believe in the Torah because of archaeological evidence, because of the mass miracles that happened to the Jewish people in front of the whole world. Then we can also believe in the things that the Torah tells us. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Let's finish off with the last one. I believe with the perfect faith that the Torah will not be changed and will never be any other Torah given by the Torah. Why? By the Creator. Thank you. Thank you for keeping me on my toes right there. Why won't the Torah change? So here's the fascinating thing about the Torah. The Talmud tells us that God looked into the Torah and created the world, right? The Torah was the blueprint for the world, which leads us to a fascinating insight. We think that human beings have a tendency to steal. Therefore, God gave us a law, thou shalt not steal. In actual fact, it's the opposite. God wrote the Torah, and in the Torah it says, thou shalt not steal. So for argument's sake, God looked into the Torah and says, what type of world do I need to make so that people won't steal. I need to make a world where people have a temptation to steal, right? If you leave $1,000 in front of your dog, is your dog gonna take that $1,000?
No,
No, right? If you leave a pet toy or a pet treat in front of your dog, is the animal gonna
Yeah.
take it? Yes, right? The animal has no temptation to steal money, right?
unless it has like gravy on it or something.
Great, exactly. But
Yeah.
like money, there's no temptation. God could have created human beings the same way. That we have no temptation to take what's not ours. But that's not how God created us. Because there's a mitzvah, thou shalt not steal, therefore we have a temptation to steal. So that we have the choice, do I choose to take what's not mine? Or do I choose to listen to what the Torah is telling me to do? And again, each of us have temptations in different areas. So if that's not your temptation to steal and take things which isn't, there's probably an area in the Torah that you have a temptation for to either do or not do as a the Torah. Now, so that's why the Torah won't change, because it's the blueprint for the world, right? So the whole world would have to change in order for the Torah to change. Does that mean that there's no room for creativity within the Torah? Again, it doesn't mean there's no room for creativity, but that creativity has to be based in authentic Torah, right? We're told that the written and the oral Torah were given together at Sinai, and they were passed down. And all of the oral Torah was given at the same time as Sinai, but some of it, when we not even nowadays, when Torah scholars or anyone has a new idea that's rooted in authentic Torah, that is a spark that was given at Sinai and is being revealed now, and that is kind of the unchanging nature of the Torah, but it has to be rooted in authentic Torah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.